Is taxes going to be easier than healthcare reform?
Joe, I don't know that it is. The last time comprehensive tax reform happened, as you know, was 1986. Speaker Paul Ryan was in high school then, and the number of members of Congress who are still around today with that institutional memory, you can probably count them on your fingers. So this is a very, very difficult task. It requires taking a painful vote that will have winners and losers. There are a lot of similarities to health care in that front, and the reason it's going to be so challenging is, as we've seen on health care, Speaker Ryan has a divided conference, and that's just in the House. He's got moderates on one hand, flexing their muscle and making clear that they're not going to vote for legislation if it doesn't have things that they want or if it moves too far to the right. And we have the Freedom Caucus driving a very hard bargain, making clear they're not going to compromise. The big question now for Republicans on taxes is whether they end up doing a permanent overhaul, which would require revenue raisers in the long run so it doesn't add to the deficit after 10 years, or whether they end up doing something like President Bush did, which is essentially a tax cut that sunsets after 10 years.
So basically you're saying they can't just come in and say lop a bunch of, cut all the numbers and lop a bunch off of everyone's taxes. It's going to be more complex than that. What are the key moving parts that they're going to be haggling over?
There's going to be a big income tax cut. There's going to be a corporate tax cut. They want to collapse the income tax bracket, income tax code from seven tax brackets to 3 tax brackets. On the corporate side, it's more complicated. They want to replace the corporate tax code with essentially a border-adjusted tax that effectively raises taxes on importers and exempts exports. They want to change interest deductibility, and they're looking at a variety of other things. They haven't made a decision on what to do about carried interest or potentially how to treat capital gains. So there are a lot of different moving parts. The most controversial thing about this, Joe, is the border-adjusted tax. That's what's gotten a lot of attention. That's a key revenue raiser, and it's critical. Many top Republicans say to making this revenue neutral because we're talking about roughly $1 trillion in revenue.
So it's pretty easy to understand the dividing line between Paul Ryan and the Freedom Caucus when it came to repealing and replacing Obamacare. The Freedom Caucus just wanted to rip out as much as they could. Paul Ryan wanted to do more around the edges. What are the key ideological differences this time around between, say, Paul Ryan and the more radicals in his party?
Well, I would say the Freedom Caucus right now is not convinced that this needs to be revenue neutral. There are members, the chairman of the group, Mark Meadows, said yesterday on the Sunday shows that he doesn't personally believe that this needs to be offset. If that ends up being the case, then they're not going to be able to make this permanent. This is going to have to sunset in 10 years. And look, the Freedom Caucus is made up of hardcore conservatives, as you know, whose belief is that we shouldn't have to raise revenues to compensate, to offset tax cuts. Their belief is, if anything, government spending should be cut. Taxes should be cut, spending should be cut, and the government should keep its hand out of the country's economy to the extent that it possibly can. So that's one of the big dividing lines. Beyond that, we don't know. The Freedom Caucus hasn't put forth a list of demands on taxes, and I think a number of them haven't quite, sat down and decided what their demands are going to be. But I suspect if past this prologue, we're going to see them make some demands.
Sahil, nobody has the definitive story about why health care reform failed, but one line of inquiry is that, well, the White House their heart wasn't into it. Trump really didn't care that much about the nitty-gritty of details. Does the White House have a more clear agenda when it comes to tax reform?
I don't know about clear. I think the White House has signaled that President Trump is going to be more involved in this. We had White House spokesman Sean Spicer saying just a couple of hours ago that the White House is going to be driving the train on this. So it sounds like they intend to take a different approach on it. What House Republicans have told me is that it would help if President Trump were more active in this, and if he didn't get distracted by other issues, if he didn't, fire off wayward tweets, which is something that Leader McConnell in the Senate, the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, has also pointed out as something that doesn't really help Republicans' efforts to get stuff done.
All right.